It was just another Tuesday morning at the coffee shop on 5th Street. The kind of morning where everything feels ordinary, predictable even. Daniel sat at his usual corner table, the one near the window where the morning light came in just right. He had his laptop open, a half-empty cup of coffee going cold beside him, and a stack of papers that needed his attention. He was an architect, the kind who spent more time fixing other people's mistakes than creating something beautiful. Today was no different. He was reviewing plans for another glass and steel building that would look exactly like every other building in the city. The door chimed. He didn't look up at first. People came and went all morning in this place. It was background noise, part of the routine, but something made him glance toward the entrance. Maybe it was the way the sunlight shifted, or maybe it was something he couldn't explain. She walked in, and the whole room seemed to tilt slightly. She wasn't dressed fancy or anything, just simple clothes, a leather bag slung over one shoulder and a journal tucked under her arm. But there was something about the way she moved. Confident but not showy, like she knew exactly who she was and didn't need anyone else to confirm it. Her hair was dark and pulled back loosely, a few strands falling around her face. She walked toward the counter, and as she passed his table, their eyes met for maybe a second, just 1 second. But in that second, something happened that Daniel couldn't put into words. She ordered her drink, chai tea, he would later learn. Her voice was soft but clear, the kind of voice that made you want to lean in to hear better. She thanked the barista with a genuine smile, not the automatic kind most people give. Then she took her drink and moved to a table by the window on the opposite side of the room. Daniel tried to go back to his work. He really did. He stared at the blueprints, at the measurements and calculations that suddenly seemed incredibly boring. His eyes kept drifting up, watching her without meaning to. She had opened her journal and was writing something, completely absorbed in whatever world existed on those pages. Every so often she would pause, look out the window at the street, and a small smile would cross her face like she was remembering something pleasant. There was a grace to her, something uncommon. In a world where everyone seemed to be performing for invisible audiences, constantly checking phones and worrying about how they appeared, she just existed. Comfortable in her own skin. Daniel found that incredibly attractive, more than any physical feature could be. He noticed small things. The way she tucked that loose strand of hair behind her ear when it fell forward, the way her fingers held the pen, delicate but purposeful, the faint scent of jasmine that lingered in the air after she had walked past. These details burned themselves into his memory without his permission. An hour passed, maybe more. Daniel had accomplished almost nothing. He had been sitting there, pretending to work while stealing glances at a stranger. He felt ridiculous, like a teenager with a silly crush. He was 34 years old, a professional with a career and responsibilities. Yet here he was, unable to concentrate because a woman had walked into a coffee shop. She stood up to leave. Daniel felt an unexpected wave of disappointment wash over him. She gathered her things with the same quiet efficiency she had brought with her. As she walked toward the door, she passed his table again. This time she didn't look at him, but he caught that scent of jasmine again, and it made his chest tighten in a way he didn't understand. The door chimed as she left. Daniel watched through the window as she walked down the street, her figure getting smaller until she turned a corner and disappeared. He sat there for a long moment staring at nothing. Then he looked down at his work and realized he had drawn nothing but meaningless circles in the margin of his notepad. That evening, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling. He went home to his apartment, the one with the nice view that he barely noticed anymore. He made dinner, watched some television, tried to read a book, but his mind kept wandering back to the coffee shop, to those few seconds when their eyes had met. He told himself he was being absurd. She was just a person, someone passing through his day like hundreds of other people did. Nothing special, nothing worth obsessing over. But the mind doesn't always listen to reason. As he lay in bed that night, Daniel found himself thinking about her again. Who was she? What had she been writing in that journal? Where did she go after she left the coffee shop? These questions circled in his head like birds looking for a place to land. The next morning, Wednesday, Daniel went to his office like he was supposed to. He worked on his projects, attended his meetings, did all the things a responsible adult does, but something felt off, like he was going through the motions while his real self was somewhere else. Thursday morning came. Daniel woke up earlier than usual. He told himself he had work to do, that the coffee shop was a good place to focus. He didn't admit, not even to himself, that he was hoping to see her again. He packed his laptop, grabbed his keys, and headed out the door with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in months. The coffee shop looked the same as always. Same tables, same music playing softly in the background, same barista behind the counter. Daniel ordered his usual and took his corner table. He opened his laptop and tried to look busy, but his attention was divided, his ears tuned to the sound of the door chime, his eyes flicking up every time someone entered. An hour passed. She didn't come. Daniel felt foolish. Of course she wouldn't be here. Why would she be? She probably didn't even remember the place. Had probably just stopped in randomly on her way to somewhere more important. He was building a fantasy around a complete stranger based on nothing but a moment of eye contact. He needed to get a grip on reality. He was packing up his things, ready to leave and put this silly episode behind him, when the door chimed again. And there she was. Same leather bag, same journal, same quiet confidence. Daniel's heart did something strange in his chest, like it stumbled over itself. She ordered her chai tea, and this time, when she looked around for a place to sit, her eyes found his. Just for a moment, there was something there. Recognition, maybe, or curiosity. Then she looked away and took a different table. Daniel sat back down. He wasn't going anywhere now. He had been given a second chance at something, though he didn't know what that something was yet. All he knew was that his ordinary Tuesday morning routine had been interrupted, and he wasn't ready to let go of the interruption just yet. Not yet. 3 weeks went by, and Daniel's life developed a new rhythm. Every Tuesday and Thursday he found himself at the coffee shop. At first he pretended it was coincidence. He had always liked working there, he told himself. The atmosphere was better than his home office. The coffee was good. These were reasonable explanations that had nothing to do with a woman whose name he didn't even know. But deep down he knew the truth. He was arranging his entire schedule around the possibility of seeing her. He would check his calendar, move meetings, decline invitations, all to ensure his Tuesday and Thursday mornings were free. And she came like clockwork. Same days, roughly the same time. She would order her chai tea, settle into a spot near the window, and lose herself in her journal or a book. Daniel learned things about her through careful observation. She was left-handed. He noticed when she signed a receipt the way she held her pen. She spoke at least 2 languages. Once she took a phone call and switched effortlessly between English and what sounded like Portuguese, her voice taking on different rhythms and melodies. She had an easy laugh, the kind that came from somewhere genuine. He heard it when she was scrolling through something on her phone, a full, unguarded sound that made everyone nearby smile without knowing why. She dressed simply but with an eye for detail. A silver bracelet that caught the light, earrings that were different each time, small but distinctive, shoes that looked comfortable but stylish. Everything about her suggested someone who knew herself well, who had figured out what mattered and what didn't. Daniel found himself thinking about her at strange times. In the middle of a client meeting, he would drift off, remembering the way she tilted her head when she was deep in thought. While driving home, he would imagine what her voice sounded like up close in conversation. He hadn't been this preoccupied with someone in years. Maybe ever. Then came the rainy Thursday that changed everything. Daniel arrived at the coffee shop to find it more crowded than usual. The weather had driven everyone indoors, and nearly every table was occupied. He managed to grab his usual corner spot, but only because someone had just left. He settled in, somewhat disappointed because his view of her usual table was blocked by other people. She came in a few minutes later, shaking rain from her jacket. He watched as she ordered her tea and then looked around for a place to sit. There was nothing available. She stood there for a moment, scanning the room with a slightly frustrated expression. Then her eyes landed on his table on the empty chair across from him. Daniel's breath caught. This was it. The moment he had been unconsciously waiting for. She walked over, and up close she was even more striking. There was a softness to her features that he hadn't been able to see from a distance, but also a sharpness in her eyes that suggested a quick mind. "Excuse me," she said, and her voice was warm, friendly. "Would you mind if I sat here? Everywhere else is taken." "Of course," Daniel managed, trying to sound casual. "Please sit down." "Thank you," she said, settling into the chair. "I'm Lila, by the way." Daniel. They shook hands. Her grip was firm. confident. For a minute, they both focused on their respective work, the polite dance of strangers sharing space. But then Lila looked up and noticed what was on his laptop screen. "Are those architectural plans?" "They are," Daniel said, surprised. "You know about architecture?" "A little," she smiled. "I'm an anthropologist, actually. Cultural anthropology? But I study urban spaces a lot. How cities develop, how people interact with their environments. Architecture is a big part of that." And just like that, they were talking. Really talking. Not small talk about weather or traffic, but deep, engaging conversation about ideas. She told him about her research, about the 3 years she had spent in Southeast Asia studying migration patterns and how communities adapted to new urban environments. He told her about his frustration with modern architecture, how everything was becoming the same, how cities were losing their character. "Look at that building across the street," Daniel said, pointing out the window. "It's over 100 years old. You can see the craftsmanship, the details. Someone cared about how it looked, how it made people feel. Now we just throw up glass boxes and call it progress." Lila leaned forward, interested. "But sometimes those glass boxes serve a purpose. They're efficient, they use less energy, they accommodate more people. The question is whether we can be efficient without being soulless. That's the real challenge." They debated this point and others for the next 45 minutes. Time disappeared. Daniel forgot about his work, about everything except the conversation happening across the small table. Lila was smart, quick, with opinions that were well-formed but not rigid. She listened when he spoke. Actually listened, not just waiting for her turn to talk. It was the kind of conversation that made you feel more alive, more present. Then she checked her watch and made a small sound of surprise. "I didn't realize it was so late. I have a meeting across town." "Of course," Daniel said, trying not to let his disappointment show. As she gathered her things, Daniel noticed something that made his stomach drop. On her left hand, on that specific finger, was a delicate gold ring. Simple, elegant, unmistakable in its meaning. She was married. All the air seemed to leave the room. Daniel felt like he had been caught doing something wrong, even though they had just been talking. Just a conversation between two people in a coffee shop. Nothing more. But it felt like more, at least to him. "It was really nice talking to you," Lila said, standing up. "Maybe I'll see you around?" "Yeah," Daniel said. "Maybe." She walked away, and Daniel sat there staring at nothing. The rain continued outside, harder now, matching the sudden heaviness in his chest. He had been building something in his mind, some possibility without even realizing it. And now that possibility was gone, or rather, had never existed at all. That evening, Daniel sat in his apartment and tried to make sense of what he was feeling. He barely knew this woman. They had spoken for less than an hour. She was married to someone else, living a life that had nothing to do with him. He had no right to feel this disappointed, this conflicted, but feelings don't care about rights. They exist whether we want them to or not. And what Daniel felt was undeniable. It wasn't just attraction, though that was part of it. It was connection, recognition, like meeting someone who spoke the same language when you hadn't even realized you were speaking a dialect no one else understood. He thought about not going back to the coffee shop. It was the smart thing to do, the right thing. But even as he thought it, he knew he would go back. Because sometimes, even when we know better, we choose the thing that feels like life over the thing that feels like safety. The following Tuesday, Daniel told himself he wouldn't go to the coffee shop. He had made the decision firmly the night before. It was inappropriate to have these feelings for a married woman. The ethical thing, the mature thing, was to change his routine and move on with his life. He had plenty of other places where he could work. But Tuesday morning came, and somehow Daniel found himself parking outside the same coffee shop at the same time. He sat in his car for a moment, hand on the key in the ignition, arguing with himself. This was ridiculous. He was a grown man, not some lovesick teenager. He could control where he went and what he did. Yet he walked through that door anyway. Lila was already there, at her usual spot by the window. When she saw him, her face brightened with a genuine smile, and she waved him over. "Daniel, come sit. I saved you a chair." Something warm spread through his chest. She had saved him a chair. It meant she had been hoping he would show up. That realization was dangerous, and he knew it, but it felt too good to ignore. "How was your meeting?" he asked as he sat down, trying to keep things casual. "Long," she laughed. "Very long. But productive." How was your week? They fell into conversation easily, like they had known each other for years instead of days. They talked about their work, about books they were reading, about travel experiences. Lila had been all over the world for her research, and her stories were fascinating. She described markets in Bangkok, temples in Cambodia, the way entire communities could shift and transform within a generation. Daniel shared his own experiences, though they felt less exotic. He had traveled for work, visiting different cities to study their architecture. He talked about the old neighborhoods he loved, the ones that had somehow survived urban renewal, where you could still see the layers of history in the buildings and streets. That's what I love about anthropology, Lila said. Those layers. Nothing is ever really new. Everything is built on what came before, influenced by it. Even when we think we're breaking completely from the past, we're still in conversation with it. Like architecture, Daniel added. Even the most modern buildings are responding to historical forms, even if that response is rejection. Exactly. Her eyes lit up. It's all connected. This became their pattern. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, they would sit together and talk. Sometimes for 20 minutes before one of them had to leave, sometimes for over an hour. The conversations ranged widely, from serious to silly. They debated the best coffee in the city, discussed philosophy and politics, shared stories from their childhoods. Daniel learned more about her life in pieces. She had grown up on the West Coast. Her parents had immigrated from Brazil when she was young. She spoke Portuguese at home and English everywhere else, living in two worlds. She loved jazz music and old movies. She couldn't cook to save her life, but made excellent desserts, small details that painted a fuller picture. And she mentioned her husband. His name was Raphael. He was a surgeon, she said. Someone who saved lives every day. She said it with pride, but there was something else in her voice too. Something Daniel couldn't quite identify at first. Then he realized what it was. Loneliness. He works incredible hours, Lila said one Thursday, which I understand. His work is important, but sometimes, she trailed off, staring at her tea. Sometimes, Daniel prompted gently. Sometimes I feel like we're roommates more than partners. We see each other in passing. We have conversations about logistics, about bills and schedules, but we don't really talk anymore. Not like... She stopped herself. Not like what? Daniel asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Not like this, she said quietly, meeting his eyes. Not about things that matter. The air between them felt heavy suddenly, charged with something unspoken. Daniel knew he should change the subject, should keep things light and safe. Instead, he heard himself say, I understand that. Feeling alone even when you're not alone. Yes, Lila breathed. Exactly that. For several weeks they existed in this comfortable space. They were friends, Daniel told himself. Just friends who enjoyed each other's company and conversation. There was nothing wrong with that. People had friends. Married people had friends. This was innocent. But late at night, when Daniel was alone in his apartment, he couldn't lie to himself. He thought about her constantly. He replayed their conversations in his mind, remembering the way she laughed, the expressions that crossed her face, the moments when their hands almost touched across the table. He was falling for her, had probably already fallen, and there was nothing innocent about what he felt. His ex-girlfriend, Jennifer, noticed something was different. They had started seeing each other again casually a few months earlier. Nothing serious, just occasional dinners and movies. But now Daniel was distracted, distant. One evening, Jennifer confronted him. Who is she? Jennifer asked directly. What are you talking about? Daniel tried to deflect. You're somewhere else, Daniel. Even when you're sitting right here, you're not present. So who is she? He wanted to deny it, but Jennifer deserved better than lies. There's someone I've been talking to, but it's not what you think. Nothing's happened. But you want something to happen, Jennifer said. It wasn't a question. Daniel couldn't answer. The silence was answer enough. I'm not going to compete for your attention, Jennifer said, gathering her things. Whatever this is, you need to figure it out. But leave me out of it. She left, and Daniel sat alone in his apartment, feeling ashamed and confused. He was hurting people now. Not intentionally, but impact matters more than intent. He knew he needed to stop going to the coffee shop, needed to end this before it went any further. But Thursday morning came, and there he was again, sitting across from Lila, feeling more alive during those stolen hours than he did during the rest of his entire week. Lila was struggling too. though Daniel didn't know the full extent of it. At home, she found herself comparing every interaction with Raphael to her conversations with Daniel. Raphael came home exhausted from the hospital, barely able to stay awake through dinner. She understood, truly she did. His work was demanding and important, but understanding didn't fill the empty space that had grown between them. She started thinking about Daniel at odd moments. While grocery shopping, she would see something and think, Daniel would find that interesting. While reading before bed, she would mentally compose what she would tell him about the book. She looked forward to Tuesday and Thursday mornings with an intensity that scared her. One evening, Raphael noticed she was distracted. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Fine," Lila said automatically. "Just tired. You seem different lately," Raphael observed. "Happier, I guess. Did something good happen with your research?" "Something like that," Lila said, and guilt washed over her. She was lying to her husband. Not directly, but by omission, which felt just as bad. She lay awake that night, Raphael sleeping beside her, and asked herself what she was doing. She loved her husband. She had made vows. But she also couldn't deny what she felt when she was with Daniel. It wasn't just attraction, though that was definitely there. It was the feeling of being truly seen, truly heard, by someone who understood the way her mind worked. Both Daniel and Lila knew they were walking a dangerous line. They hadn't crossed it yet, hadn't done anything technically wrong, but they both felt it, that pull towards something they shouldn't want, and neither of them seemed able to stop. December arrived with its cold winds and early darkness. The city transformed itself for the holidays, lights strung across streets, decorations in every window. Daniel found himself walking through this transformed landscape, barely noticing it. His mind was elsewhere, as it had been for weeks. He and Lila continued their Tuesday and Thursday routine, but something had shifted. The conversations went deeper. The silences between words felt fuller. They sat closer across the table than necessary. Their hands would brush accidentally when reaching for sugar or napkins, and neither would pull away immediately. They were careful not to acknowledge what was happening. As long as they didn't name it, they could pretend it wasn't real. But both of them felt it growing, this thing between them that had no clear definition but undeniable weight. One Tuesday, Lila mentioned an upcoming lecture at the City Museum. A visiting professor would be speaking about colonial architecture and its lasting impact on urban development. "It sounds exactly like the kind of thing that would interest both of us," she said. "Are you planning to go?" "I didn't know about it," Daniel admitted. "But I'll look it up." "Maybe I'll see you there," Lila said. And there was something in her voice, something hopeful and tentative at the same time. The lecture was scheduled for a Friday evening. Daniel bought a ticket, telling himself he was going for the lecture itself, for professional development. He wasn't going hoping to see her. Except he was, completely. Friday evening came. Daniel arrived at the museum early, nervous in a way he hadn't been since high school. He wandered through the exhibit near the lecture hall, barely seeing the displays. Then he spotted her standing near a large photograph of a colonial-era building, studying it intently. She was alone. He felt a surge of something he didn't want to examine too closely. He walked over, and when she turned and saw him, her entire face lit up. "You came," she said. "Couldn't miss it," Daniel replied. "Architecture and anthropology in one evening? Too good to pass up." They attended the lecture together, sitting side by side in the darkened auditorium. Daniel was intensely aware of her presence, of the few inches of space between them. At one point during the lecture, the professor said something particularly interesting, and Lila leaned over to whisper a comment to Daniel. Her breath was warm against his ear, and he had to force himself to focus on her words instead of her closeness. After the lecture, they walked through the museum's main exhibition. It was a collection of artifacts and photographs documenting the city's history. They moved slowly from display to display, reading placards, commenting on what they saw. The museum would be closing soon, and the crowds had thinned. They had large sections of the exhibition to themselves. "Where's Raphael tonight?" Daniel asked, immediately regretting the question. He didn't usually ask about her husband directly. Lila's expression shifted slightly. "Emergency surgery. A car accident. He called just as I was leaving." He felt terrible about missing this, but she shrugged. "It's what he does. He saves lives. How can I complain about that?" "You can miss him and be proud of him at the same time," Daniel offered. "Can I?" Lila looked at him. Sometimes I'm not sure what I feel anymore. They had reached the museum cafe, which was still open for another hour. Daniel suggested they grab a drink, and Lila agreed. They found a quiet corner table, away from the few other people still lingering. Over glasses of wine, their conversation turned more personal than it ever had before. Lila talked about her marriage, about how she and Raphael had met in graduate school, how they had been so sure of everything back then. We had all these plans, she said, but life gets in the way. His career took off. Mine took off. We started running parallel instead of together. Have you talked to him about it? Daniel asked. I've tried, but he's always exhausted, or there's an emergency, or something needs immediate attention, and I tell myself it's temporary, that things will slow down, but they never do. She paused. Is it wrong that I'm tired of being understanding? No, Daniel said firmly. It's not wrong. You're allowed to have needs. What about you? Lila asked. You mentioned an ex-girlfriend once. What happened there? Daniel told her about Jennifer, about how they had drifted apart and then tried again only for it to fall apart once more. He didn't mention that Jennifer had left specifically because of his growing feelings for someone else. For Lila, that felt like too much truth for this moment. Why did it fall apart? Lila pressed. Daniel looked at her across the table. The cafe lighting was soft, warm. She had her chin resting on her hand, watching him with those intelligent eyes. He wanted to tell her the truth, wanted to say, because I couldn't stop thinking about you. Because every moment I spent with her, I wished I was with you instead. But he couldn't say that. It would make everything real, undeniable. We wanted different things, he said instead. It was true enough, even if it wasn't the whole truth. The museum announced it would be closing in 15 minutes. Neither of them moved to leave immediately. They stayed in their corner, finishing their wine, stretching out these final moments together. Finally, they had no choice but to go. They walked out into the December night. It had started snowing while they were inside, the first real snow of the season. Big, soft flakes falling through the streetlights, muffling the city sounds. Everything felt hushed, magical even. I should get to my car, Lila said. But she didn't move. I'll walk you, Daniel offered. They walked through the parking lot, their footsteps crunching in the fresh snow. Neither spoke. The silence felt full, heavy with things unsaid. When they reached her car, Lila turned to face him. Thank you for coming tonight, she said softly. I had a really good time. Me too, Daniel said, and his voice came out rougher than intended. They stood there, snow falling around them, looking at each other. The moment stretched. Daniel could see tiny snowflakes catching in her hair, melting on her cheeks. He wanted to brush them away. He wanted so many things he couldn't have. Something shifted in the air between them. Lila took a half step closer. Daniel's hand came up, moving on its own, reaching toward her face. They were both leaning in, pulled by something stronger than logic or morality or any of the reasons this was wrong. Then Lila stopped. She stepped back abruptly, and Daniel saw tears forming in her eyes. I can't, she whispered. I'm sorry, Daniel. I shouldn't have. I can't do this, Lila. He started, but she shook her head. This is wrong. We both know it's wrong. I'm married. I made promises. Her voice broke. God, what am I doing? We haven't done anything, Daniel said, even though they both knew that wasn't entirely true, haven't we? Lila looked at him, and the pain in her expression cut through him. I think about you constantly. I plan my week around Tuesday and Thursday mornings. I compare every conversation I have with my husband to conversations I have with you. That's not nothing, Daniel. That's not innocent. She was right. Daniel knew she was right. I can't see you anymore, Lila continued. Not like this. It's not fair to Raphael. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to anyone. Lila, please. I have to go, she said, opening her car door quickly. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She got in her car and drove away before Daniel could respond. He stood there in the falling snow, his hand still raised where it had been reaching for her face. He stood there until his feet were numb from cold, until the snow had accumulated on his shoulders and hair. He stood there because he didn't know what else to do, where else to go. Everything had changed. Nothing could change. And Daniel understood finally what it meant to want something so badly, while knowing you could never have it. The following Tuesday, Daniel went to the coffee shop. He knew she wouldn't be there, but he went anyway. Maybe out of habit, maybe out of hope, maybe because he didn't know what else to do with himself. He sat at his usual table and tried to work, but the empty chair across from him felt like an accusation. She didn't come. Thursday either, or the Tuesday after that. 3 weeks passed, and Daniel slowly accepted that it was really over. Whatever it had been, a friendship, an almost relationship, a moment out of time that had felt perfect until reality crashed back in. He missed her. That was the simple truth. He missed her laugh, her insights, the way she made him feel more present in his own life. He missed the anticipation of Tuesday and Thursday mornings. Now those days felt like any others, equally gray and predictable. Through a colleague who knew people in the academic community, Daniel heard that Lila and Raphael were in couples therapy. He felt a complicated mix of emotions at this news. Relief because maybe they would fix whatever had broken between them. Guilt because he had been part of what pushed them toward that breaking point. Loss because it meant any possibility of seeing her again was truly gone now. He thought about what he could have done differently. Should he have stopped going to the coffee shop after that first day? Should he have kept more distance when they started talking? Should he have been honest with her about his feelings from the beginning? Every path seemed to lead to pain, either his or hers or both. Slowly, carefully, Daniel began to rebuild his life. He started going to different coffee shops, breaking the pattern. He took on new projects at work, throwing himself into designs with renewed focus. He went on a few dates, nothing serious, just testing the waters of normalcy again. The world kept turning, the way it always does, indifferent to individual heartbreak. Months passed. Winter gave way to spring. The city changed its clothes, putting away grays and bringing out greens. Daniel found himself healing in small increments. He could go whole hours without thinking about her, then whole days. The sharp pain dulled to a persistent ache, and eventually even that began to fade. He learned things from the experience. About the complexity of human connection, about how feelings don't follow rules or respect boundaries, about how you can want something desperately and still choose not to take it, about the strange courage it takes to walk away from what feels like love. One morning in late April, Daniel found himself at a new coffee shop across town. It was smaller than his old place, less crowded. He had settled into a routine here, though it lacked the magic of those Tuesday and Thursday mornings. But maybe that was good. Maybe magic was overrated. Maybe ordinary was exactly what he needed. He was reading something on his laptop when the door opened. He didn't look up, didn't pay attention to who entered. Not until he heard a familiar voice ordering at the counter. His heart stopped. Lila. She was with an older woman who looked like her, probably her mother. They were laughing about something, the easy laughter of people comfortable with each other. Lila looked different somehow. Her hair was shorter. She seemed lighter, less burdened. Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, everything else disappeared. There was recognition, memory, and something else. Sadness, maybe, or acceptance. She gave him a small smile, not quite sad, but not quite happy either. A smile that acknowledged everything that had happened and everything that hadn't. Daniel nodded back. No words were necessary. They had said everything that needed saying that night in the snow. Lila and her mother took their drinks to a table on the other side of the shop. They didn't approach him, and he didn't approach them. They existed in the same space but separate, like parallel lines that had once threatened to intersect but ultimately maintained their courses. Daniel tried to focus on his work, but he was aware of her presence. Not in the urgent, consuming way he had been before, more like an echo, a reminder of something that used to be. He could hear her voice occasionally, speaking Portuguese with her mother, animated and engaged with someone who clearly loved her. After about 30 minutes, they stood to leave. As they walked toward the door, Lila passed his table. For just a second, she paused. Their eyes met again. This time, her smile was a little stronger, a little more at peace. He returned it. Then she continued walking, following her mother out into the spring sunshine. Daniel watched through the window as they walked down the street together. Mother and daughter, arms linked, heads bent toward each other in conversation. They turned a corner and disappeared from view. He felt something then. Not the sharp pain of loss he had expected. Something gentler. Bittersweet, yes, but not unbearable. He felt gratitude for what they had shared, brief as it was. He felt respect for the choice she had made. The choice they had both made, really. He felt the peculiar kind of pride that comes from doing the right thing even when it costs you something precious. The pull was still there. He couldn't deny that. Some part of him would probably always wonder what might have been. What could have happened in a different universe where circumstances were different. But the pull was fainter now, more like a shadow than a force. Something you could acknowledge and then continue past. Daniel returned to his work. He answered emails, reviewed plans, scheduled meetings. He did all the ordinary things that make up a life. And for the first time in months, the ordinary felt like enough. Not perfect, not magical, but genuine. Real. He thought about desire and how it follows us like a shadow, present but not always defining. He thought about the roads we choose not to take and how they shape us just as much as the ones we do. He thought about love in its many forms, including the kind that means letting go. That evening, Daniel went home to his apartment. He made dinner, called an old friend he hadn't talked to in too long, laughed at jokes that weren't particularly funny but felt good anyway. He went to bed at a reasonable hour, and for the first time in months he slept straight through the night. Life had returned to its regular rhythm, but Daniel was different now, changed by what he had experienced and what he had chosen not to pursue. He understood something he hadn't before, about the space between wanting and having, about the maturity required to live in that space without bitterness. Some connections are meant to be felt, not fulfilled. Some people come into our lives to teach us about ourselves, to show us what we're capable of feeling, and then to step away so we can grow from the lesson. Lila had been that for him, and maybe he thought he had been that for her too. The shadow of desire would probably always be there, faint but present, but shadows only exist because of light, and Daniel chose to focus on the light. The possibilities still ahead, the connections yet to be made, the ordinary moments that, when you paid attention, weren't ordinary at all. He had walked through fire and come out changed but not destroyed. He had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is nothing at all, and he had discovered that you can carry both loss and hope at the same time, that they aren't opposites but companions on the journey forward. And so he moved forward, carrying his memories like photographs in a wallet, occasionally glimpsed but not constantly examined. He moved forward into a future undefined, uncertain, but ultimately his own, and that he realized was more than enough.